Hey guys, tonight we're going on a long, meandering walk through some of the dustiest, bloodiest, and most baffling events in medieval history. The Crusades. You're standing in a crowd in 1095, the air thick with incense, sweat, and misplaced righteousness. The Pope is yelling something about Jerusalem, and suddenly every bored, noble, and restless peasant is clutching a cross and planning a very long, very violent road trip. The air is buzzing with purpose, and let's be honest, more than a little peer pressure. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake by the end, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's late November of 1095, and you're just one of thousands pressed into a field outside the French town of Clermont. The voice you're straining to hear belongs to Pope Urban II. He's not mincing words. There's talk of saving Christian pilgrims, reclaiming Jerusalem, and cleansing your sins through battle. But underneath the hymns and piety, you feel that this is more a recruitment rally than spiritual sermon. And boy, it works. You glance around and see hardened knights, hungry farmers, and enthusiastic teens all fired up. The First Crusade is born not just from faith, but famine, politics, and the fact that Europe is getting way too crowded. Feudal lords have too many sons, and not enough land to inherit. You're not dumb, no, the church has motives. A holy war sounds a lot better than another squabble between petty kingdoms. Urban's real genius lies in promising salvation in exchange for violence. That's the kind of trade medieval Europe understands. You trudge back to your manor, your mud hut, thinking about this wild offer. If you die gloriously, heaven awaits. If you survive, maybe you get your own plot of land in the sun-drenched east. Honestly, either option sounds better than another winter in your drafty village. So you pack, but you're not alone. By spring of 1096, tens of thousands are on the move. From knights in gleaming armor to peasants with pitchforks and zero idea what logistics means. You're lumped into what historians now call the People's Crusade. Spoiler, it's a mess. Led by a wild-eyed monk named Peter the Hermit, your group stumbles into Europe's first taste of Crusader chaos. Before even reaching the Holy Land, your ragtag horde gets sidetracked by looting Jewish communities in the Rhineland, of all places. You wince. This wasn't in the sermon. Historians still argue whether this spontaneous wave was ever officially sanctioned. What's certain is that it goes badly. The People's Crusade marches east, gets wrecked by the Seljuk Turks in Anatolia, and vanishes in a puff of screams and broken dreams. If you're lucky, you get the memo and wait for the real army. That real force, the Knightly Crusade, finally sets off. It's made up of 4 main contingents from France, Germany, and southern Italy, all converging in Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I isn't thrilled. You people are kind of unpredictable. He was hoping for a few trained mercenaries, not a tidal wave of cross-bearing maniacs. Still, you cross the Bosporus into Asia Minor, with big dreams and blistered feet. Almost immediately, you notice something. You're not prepared for this. The terrain is brutal, supplies are scarce, and you can't agree on who's in charge. Every noble seems to think he's the chosen one. Even your sword feels too heavy. Still, the army stumbles its way forward, winning a few bloody victories and making enemies out of both Turks and Byzantines along the way. You notice that pilgrimage is starting to feel a lot like invasion. Meanwhile, back home, legends are growing. People are calling this a sacred mission, a divine clash between civilizations. But on the ground, you're mostly hungry, sunburnt, and constantly losing your socks in the mud. The Crusade is spiritual theater, with very real consequences. And you're the understudy suddenly stuck in the starring role. One night, as you camp near a burned-out village, someone tells you about a crusader who insisted his sword glowed whenever he was near relics. Another guy swears he saw St. George fighting beside him in battle. You pretend to believe them. Honestly, anything to distract from the smell of your traveling companions, who haven't bathed since Easter. Even now, historians still argue whether this first crusade was truly about religion, or whether it was mostly a colonial land grab. In God's name, probably both. But for you, slogging across Anatolia, it doesn't matter. You've passed the point of no return. You dream of Jerusalem, of golden domes, and redemption. But right now, all you can think about is your aching legs, the buzzing flies, and the fact that someone stole your boots again. You've been walking for what feels like a century, and you're not even out of Anatolia. The sun scorches your back by day, and the cold gnaws at your bones by night. Still, you trudge forward. Every step brings you closer to the Holy Land, so they say. But honestly, by now, you'd settle for a decent meal, and someone who knows how to read a map. Soon, your army arrives in Byzantine territory, where the welcome is complicated. You're supposed to be allies, but you can't help noticing the locals eyeing your sword like they expect you to rob them. And well, they're not exactly wrong. Supplies are short, tempers are shorter, and even the holiest among you are starting to see looting as God's provision. The crusading ideal, the pure quest for Jerusalem, starts unraveling fast. Your fellow knights raid friendly villages for food, gold, and the occasional donkey. Churches are plundered. Icons are defaced. One particularly bored noble starts claiming every chicken coop he passes is infested with heresy and must be purified through stew. The Byzantines are increasingly annoyed, but they've learned to be diplomatic when survival's on the line. They give you guides and point vaguely eastward, no doubt hoping you'll disappear into the wilderness and never come back. You oblige by the time you make it to Antioch in 1097. Your armor is rusted, your faith is dented, and your standards for dinner have sunk to anything that doesn't still fight back. But don't worry, things are about to get so much worse. Before Antioch, there's Nicaea, a key Turkish stronghold. You're expecting a good old-fashioned siege catapults, battering rams, glorious charges. What you get is awkward politics. The Byzantines make a sneaky deal behind your back and accept the city's surrender before your knights can sack it. The loot you are already mentally spending vanishes like smoke. You try not to sulk, but it's tough. That ruby-studded goblet you were eyeing is now sitting on some Byzantine general's shelf, so morale takes a hit. You push onward to Antioch, where the real nightmare begins. This ancient walled city, perched like a crown on a rocky hill, refuses to fall easily. You surround it, dig in, and wait, and wait, and wait. Winter comes, supplies dwindle. You eat your horse, then you eat your second horse, then you eye your neighbor's boots, and wonder how much leather stew counts as a sin. The siege drags on for 8 months, and you start losing track of time. Snow falls, famine hits, disease spreads like gossip. People start mumbling about cannibalism. One guy definitely eats his dog. Another tries to eat a leather Bible, claiming the word of God will sustain him. It doesn't. Still, somehow, through bribery and betrayal, the Crusaders eventually sneak into the city. It's a rare win. But before you can celebrate, the Turks counterattack. Now you're trapped inside the city, with even fewer supplies and far more corpses. You think about leaving, about going home. But then, the Holy Lance.R, yes, one of your fellow Crusaders, a visionary named Peter Bartholomew, claims he's had a divine vision. He says the actual spear that pierced Christ's side during the crucifixion is buried right beneath your feet, in the cathedral. At this point, people are so desperate for meaning, they'd follow a prophecy scribbled on a cabbage. Sure enough, after much theatrical digging, Peter produces a suspiciously well-preserved iron point. Miracle, plant job. Historians still argue whether the Holy Lance was genuine, a brilliant morale trick, or just a very lucky piece of scrap metal. But you know what? It works. Spirits soar. The Crusaders rally and launch a furious assault, defeating the Turkish forces and solidifying their control of Antioch. Victory ugly, confusing, and probably fake tastes pretty sweet right now. You stagger through the gates, past piles of bodies and splintered shields, wondering how this dusty city turned into such a crucible. Everyone's starving, limping, hallucinating, and now you're expected to govern. Governance, it turns out, is just another word for arguing about who gets the nicest chair. Back home, they're already painting you as a saintly warrior. Songs are sung, coins are minted, and board monks copy embellished tales of your heroism. You'd laugh if your mouth weren't so dry. And still, Jerusalem lies far ahead. You can see it in your dreams. Golden domes, sacred stones, redemption. But you also dream of bread. Bread would be nice. You're no longer the wide-eyed pilgrim who left Claremont. You've seen what war smells like. You've watched friends die in puddles of their own armor sweat. You've learned that holy missions come with taxes, backstabbing, and very unreliable horses at night. By the fire, someone brings out a tattered piece of parchment. It shows the route ahead: mountains, deserts, rivers you can't pronounce. You stare into the embers and wonder what will break first: your body, your faith, or your sword. You think of Peter, Bartholomew again, still clutching his holy lance. He's become a bit of a celebrity among the troops. Some swear he glows in the dark. Others say he's just full of worms. Both might be true. That's the thing about this crusade. It's all contradictions. Piety mixed with pillaging. Brotherhood laced with betrayal. Every prayer answered by a sword swing. You push onward because the story won't let you stop. And because, let's be honest, you're a little afraid to go home empty-handed. You wake with ants in your boots, dust in your teeth, and the distant echo of coughing from someone who probably isn't going to make it through the week. The army's moving again. Limping southward, your ragtag force finally edges closer to its long-promised prize, Jerusalem. But not quite yet. First, you've got to survive another siege. This time Antioch's evil twin, Merit al-Numan. You may want to brace yourself. The year is 1098. You're exhausted, half-starved, and marching through a town that, on a good day, smells like onions and wet stone. On this day, though, it smells like decay. The Crusaders are once again low on supplies, and Merit refuses to surrender peacefully. So, of course, you lay siege. That's just what you do now. Someone sneezes, someone dies, and someone else eats a rat. It doesn't take long for the situation to go sideways. After a brutal assault, the city finally falls. You expect some food, a little loot, maybe a pillow. But all you find is rot, moldy grain, and a population that's either fled, dead, or dying. And this is where things take a sharp stomach-turning detour. You hear whispers, then accusations, then laughter, bitter and deranged. Your fellow Crusaders, men you've marched with for years now, are talking about eating the bodies. Some are joking, some are not. You avert your eyes and pretend you didn't see what you just saw. But the reports filter out anyway. Back home, rumors spread, Crusaders resorting to cannibalism, not out of cruelty but sheer desperation. Fringe tale, some say. Blasphemy, others shout. Yet medieval chroniclers record it in disturbing detail. Historians still argue whether it's exaggerated wartime propaganda or a grim truth no one wants to believe. You want to laugh it off. Say it was just stories. But when someone offers you soup and doesn't explain what's in it, you hesitate. The mood changes after Merit. The crusade feels cursed now, like it's gone off script. No one sings as they march. You've stopped pretending this is a holy picnic. It's survival, plain and ugly. Still, Jerusalem is getting closer. You can feel it in the dry wind, in the pilgrims who suddenly join your ranks, weeping with joy. You pass relics and roadside crosses, and for a moment, just a moment, you feel something sacred again. That fades quickly when you step into a puddle of horse guts. Then it happens. June 1099. You crest a hill, and there it is, Jerusalem. The city shines under the sun, austere and golden, a jewel wrapped in stone walls and ancient fear. Your heart pounds. All this suffering, all the death, surely it meant something. Spoiler, the walls don't exactly fling themselves open in gratitude. The siege of Jerusalem is unlike anything you've seen. The city is fiercely defended by a mixed force of Fatimid Egyptians, and the defenders are just as determined to keep you out as you are to get in. You camp outside the gates, parched and sweltering. your lips cracked and bleeding. Water is rationed, morale is brittle, and discipline collapses entirely. One knight starts charging people to bless their weapons with miracle dust. You briefly consider punching him. A few Genoese ships manage to land siege equipment in pieces, which you drag laboriously across dry ground. You help build wooden towers, battering rams, and ladders, all while trying not to die of heatstroke. You tell yourself the city is almost yours. You say it so many times, you almost believe it. Then, on July 15th, the final assault begins. The sun beats down mercilessly as your army moves like a slow tide toward the walls. Arrows rain from above. Oil and fire follow. You smell roasted flesh and don't look up to see whose it is. Eventually, a breach is made. The Crusaders pour in. What follows is difficult to describe. You try to keep your eyes forward. You try not to hear the screams. Blood flows through the narrow streets of Jerusalem, and someone says it reaches the ankles. Probably exaggerated, you tell yourself. Definitely exaggerated. Probably, but the massacre is real. Muslims, Jews, even some Eastern Christians, are cut down indiscriminately. Holy places become slaughterhouses. Men pray while knee-deep in corpses. You find yourself in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and someone starts singing. You join in, voice shaking, eyes wide. You've made it. You're here, but at what cost? You try to believe it was worth it. That this is what Urban promised you. That heaven is just around the corner. But your hands are shaking, your stomach is empty, and your soul feels bruised. Later, a handful of Crusader leaders gather to decide who gets what. No one's really surprised when Godfrey of Bouillon takes the top job. He declines the title of king, calls himself Defender of the Holy Sepulchre instead. Humble bragging is very on brand for him. You wander the narrow alleys of Jerusalem, now eerily silent. The bodies have been burned or buried, but the memories linger like smoke. You think about the Holy Lance, about merit, about the people who never made it this far. You wonder if they're luckier. You kneel before a stone wall that pilgrims kiss and whisper to. It's warm from the sun and sticky from someone else's tears. You feel nothing. The First Crusade ends, not with a triumphant fanfare, but with a stunned, hollow quiet. You're alive. You're victorious. But you're not quite sure what you've won. You're still in Jerusalem, but it's not the shining beacon of holiness you imagined. Instead, it smells of ash and dried blood, and the silence feels too loud. There's no cheering anymore, just exhausted murmurs, the shuffle of feet, and the occasional cry from someone realizing they lost everything on the way here. Welcome to your new Crusader kingdom. Godfrey rules, sort of. You remember him from the marches. Big guy, decent sword hand. He declines the title of king because, he says, he wouldn't wear a crown of gold where Christ wore a crown of thorns. A poetic gesture, but also one that doesn't stop him from taking the best tower in town and demanding tribute from pretty much everyone. The Crusader states are being carved up, like yesterday's bread. You've got the kingdom of Jerusalem, of course, but also the county of Edessa, the principality of Antioch, and the county of Tripoli forming up north. These are supposed to be beacons of Christian virtue and stability. In reality, they're feudal messes ruled by squabbling warlords who speak different dialects, use different coins, and occasionally stab each other over olive groves. You're given a tiny plot of land, rocky and dry, with a fig tree that produces exactly 1 fig per month. Congratulations! You're officially a noble now, sort of. You still sleep on a blanket full of fleas, and get dysentery twice a week. But now you do it with status. Locals watch you with a mix of curiosity and horror. Some have fled, others try to adapt. Arabic, Greek, Latin, and Armenian blend in the markets. You hear 10 languages before breakfast and understand none of them. You smile a lot and try not to get stabbed. And then there's the military orders. You bump into a few Knights Templar, on patrolmen in white cloaks with red crosses who take vows of poverty, chastity, and apparently joy. They're monks with swords, and they patrol the roads like medieval traffic cops. The Hospitallers are around too, more into healing, but also armed to the teeth. Quirky side note, at some point, someone tries to sell you a relic. It's a vial of Mary's milk. Another vendor swears he has one of the feathers from the Archangel Gabriel's wing. You buy a rock, allegedly thrown by David at Goliath. You immediately regret this. Pilgrims begin to trickle into the city now that it's safe. And you find yourself playing tour guide more often than soldier. But the thing is, it's not safe. Muslim forces haven't given up. They're regrouping, rearming, and staring at your shiny new castle with interest. Historians still argue whether the Crusader states ever had a real chance at long-term survival. On parchment, they look impressive. But on the ground, you're surrounded by enemies, undermanned and underfed. Diplomacy with local Muslim leaders is fragile at best, non-existent at worst. And there's constant tension between the Latin Christians and the local Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Christian populations. You all supposedly follow the same religion, but apparently that means arguing about who gets to hold the keys to the tomb every Easter. The weather doesn't help either. Summer in the Levant is brutal. Your armor gives you heat rash in places you'd rather not mention. The winters are damp and muddy. Your favorite horse dies of a sandstorm-induced panic attack. You don't talk about it. A few years pass. You hear rumors that the Muslims are organizing. You don't panic. After all, God is on your side. And, besides, you've got fortified cities, military orders, and a new shipment of wine from Europe. But deep down, you sense that this won't last. The First Crusade was a wild, improbable success. Too improbable. It was a storm that caught everyone off guard. But now the storm is over, and the wind is turning. And then it happens. Edessa falls. Word comes in a flurry of messengers and sobbing monks. The county of Edessa, your easternmost outpost, your warning bell has been crushed by Zengi, a powerful Turkish ruler. The walls were breached, the churches desecrated, and the survivors either enslaved or slaughtered. You sit by a fire as the news sinks in. The crusade might be over, but the war definitely isn't. You look around at your fellow settlers, sunburned, scarred, and eating stew made from something that might once have been pigeon and realize the dream is cracking. Even your loot is starting to rust. You mutter a half-hearted prayer and stare into the flames. This wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to win once and for all. You were supposed to build a shining kingdom that would last until Judgment Day. Not whatever this is. Jerusalem still stands for now, but the tide is rising. You sharpen your sword. You count your dwindling coins, and you start hearing whispers of a second crusade. Oh no, not again. You were just getting used to life in your dusty little crusader fiefdom, sweating through chainmail, arguing over water rights, occasionally chasing bandits out of shrines. Then Edessa fell, and now everyone's panicking. You knew the peace wouldn't last, but still, this fast. The news ripples back to Europe, like a bad smell in a small room. Kings and popes stir from their thrones, clutching their rosaries and muttering about divine justice. You hear whispers in the market a Sycan Crusade. Some laugh, others cry. You just sigh. You've seen how this ends. Sure enough, in 1145, Pope Eugenius III issues a new call to arms. This one has official PayPal backing and a hype man. Bernard of Clairvaux, a charismatic monk with wild eyes and even wilder sermons. He's got the passion, the pedigree, and the press team. Soon, everyone from Paris to Prague is talking about taking the cross again, and this time, it's the big leagues. 2 kings sign up. Louis VII of France and Conrad III of Germany. Real royal blood, fancy armor, full entourages. You imagine they'll do better than the last bunch of barefoot pilgrims with pitchforks. Spoiler, they don't. You're still in the Holy Land when word arrives that the armies of Europe are on the march. You meet one of the scouts. He's sunburned, half-starved, and keeps muttering about Hungarian toll booths and German knights drowning in flooded valleys. Classic start. Louis VII and Conrad take separate routes, because coordination is apparently for amateurs. Conrad's German army reaches Anatolia first, and promptly walks into a Turkish ambush near Dorylaeum. It's a bloodbath. You hear about entire divisions wiped out before they even glimpse the Mediterranean. The survivors limp into Byzantine territory, muttering about betrayal and ghosts. Conrad himself barely escapes. He ends up at a monastery, nursing his wounds and probably reconsidering some life choices. Louis VII fares slightly better, emphasis on slightly. His French forces suffer from poor logistics, wild terrain, and a tendency to argue about everything. Also, Eleanor of Aquitaine is with him. That's right, his queen. She insists on bringing a royal entourage that includes musicians, chefs, and possibly a few goats. It's like a disastrous medieval reality show. You hear stories of her dressing as an Amazon warrior and leading troops herself. Historians still argue whether that's true or just a juicy exaggeration. Either way, the French campaign dissolves into chaos. Supplies vanish. Morale crumbles. Louis ends up sneaking through Turkish territory with his armor rusted and his pride wounded. Eventually, both kings limp into Jerusalem, looking less like conquering heroes and more like heavily armed refugees. You see them once, riding into the city under banners frayed by wind and shame. They gather at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, whispering prayers and trying not to make eye contact with the locals. Then comes the plan, a bold strike against Damascus. You raise an eyebrow. Damascus, not Edessa, not the place that actually fell. Apparently not. Political alliances have shifted, and attacking Damascus seems like the best way to show strength without asking too many questions. It's a disaster. You join the march north because, why not? It's not like you've got a harvest to tend. The Crusader army lays siege to Damascus in 1148. But the city's defenses are strong, the terrain is unfavorable, and the locals are really not in the mood for another Western invasion. Within 4 days, the whole assault collapses. For days, it's a record-breaking failure. The Crusader coalition disintegrates faster than dried parchment in a rainstorm. Conrad sulks all the way back to Germany. Louis stays behind in Jerusalem for a bit, then sails off to France, with Eleanor, though not for long. Their marriage crumbles, and she eventually remarries a guy named Henry Plantagenet. You'll know him better as Henry II of England. You return to your crumbling Crusader outpost, watching the horizon for another storm. The Second Crusade is over, and it achieved exactly nothing. Well, unless you count strained alliances, wasted lives, and the rise of stronger Muslim coalitions as something. And that's the real legacy. The Crusaders blew their chance. While the Christian world flailed around Damascus, a new leader was rising, quiet, clever, and far more competent than anyone you've met so far. Saladin, his name is already being whispered in your camp, like a distant thunderclap. He's smart, diplomatic, and genuinely devout. Not the kind of guy who eats horses or sells fake relics. He serves under Nur ad-Din for now, but it won't be long before he steps into the spotlight. You sharpen your sword. You clean your armor. You feed the last fig from your tree to a stray cat, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, this next part of the story will go better. But deep down, you already know better. You're back in Jerusalem, and things feel twitchy. There's an air of nervous anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm rolls in. You see knights riding a little faster, guards posted a little thicker, and nobles whispering with furrowed brows behind too-thin curtains. Everyone senses it. Something big is coming, and that something has a name: Saladin. You've heard the stories by now. He started off as a quiet administrator, a paper pusher with a sword. Not exactly the kind of guy you'd expect to reshape empires. But under Nur ad-Din's guidance, Saladin rose through the ranks like a well-oiled siege tower. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just won. And he did it with strategy, discipline, and a style that makes your side look like a traveling circus. He's a unifier in a fractured world. Sunni Shia Fatimid, Turkic, Kurdish Saladin finds ways to pull the Muslim world together, piece by piece. Historians still argue whether it was political brilliance or sheer divine timing. But by the 1170s, he's in charge of both Egypt and Syria. That's bad news for your side. You, meanwhile, are busy trying to keep the lights on. The Crusader states are still there, barely. You hold Jerusalem, but just about everything else is one sword fight away from collapse. The nobility squabbles. The kings are either too young, too sick, or too distracted to govern well. And you've lost count of how many sieges you've survived. Your armor doesn't shine anymore, it just creaks. Then comes 1177. Saladin leads a massive army, some say, over 20,000 men north, toward the coast. His goal: wipe the Crusader states off the map in one swift campaign. You brace for impact, but something strange happens. A young King Baldwin IV, known as the Leper, King, rides out with a tiny force and defeats Saladin at the Battle of Mount Gizzard. It's a miracle, or at least, a fluke. You see Baldwin once, from a distance. His face is wrapped in linen, his hands curled from disease. He looks like death warmed over, but he rides like he's got angels pushing him forward. You cheer him. That day, you cry later, when he starts to fade. Baldwin's reign is brief and tragic. Leprosy eats away at him, even as he tries to hold his kingdom together with bandages and pure stubbornness. He's one of the last truly noble rulers you'll serve. After he's gone, it all starts unraveling. Which brings us to 1187. You wake. Before dawn, one hot July morning, two shouting, angry, frantic shouting. Words come in. The Crusader army has marched out to meet Saladin. They've left the relative safety of their castles and are now camped in open territory near two rocky hills called the Horns of Hattin. You don't even finish your bread. You grab your gear and ride. When you reach the battlefield, it's already over. It's a scene out of a nightmare. The Christian army, your army, is shattered. Bodies lie bloated in the sun. Horses twitch where they've fallen. The king, Guy of Lusignan, is captured. The true crosses, that true cross, is taken as a trophy. You just stare. You don't speak for hours. The defeat at Hattin breaks the Crusader backbone. It's not just a loss, it's the loss. Saladin wastes no time. One by one, he sweeps through the Holy Land, retaking cities, smashing resistance. And eventually, on October 2nd, 1187, he marches into Jerusalem. You're not there when it falls. You're further north, licking your wounds and trying to keep your sword from rusting in your own sweat, but you hear how it happened. No mass slaughter, no desecration, no rivers of blood. Saladin negotiates the surrender. Christians are allowed to leave, some even stay. It's strangely civilized. You can't help but admire it, even as it makes your side look like butchers by comparison. Historians still argue whether Saladin was truly merciful, or just smart enough to know leniency would cement his reputation. Either way, it works. You wander through a ghost town that once buzzed with Latin pilgrims and overconfident knights. Now, it's mostly silence, punctuated by the sound of mules carrying the last of the Latin clergy out of town, back in Europe. The panic spreads faster than wildfire in a hayloft. Popes scream, kings pout. Everyone with a crown suddenly wants in on the next big holy war. It won't be long before another crusade, the Third Crusade, gathers strength. You're tired. You've been through this before. But when word comes that Richard, the Lionheart himself, is joining the cause, you start polishing your sword again, just in case. Because you've lost Jerusalem. You've lost the true cross. You've lost friends, hope, and any sense of what victory really means. But the story's not done with you yet. You're back on your feet, sharpening your sword, with a kind of weary rhythm that only comes from having done this far too many times before. The mood in your camp has shifted, not quite hopeful, but buzzing with restless anticipation. Word has it the kings of Europe are coming. Not nobles, not dukes, kings. And one of them, he's practically a myth already. Richard the Lionheart. By 1190, the Third Crusade is revving up like an angry medieval engine. After the shocking loss of Jerusalem to Saladin, the Christian world collectively loses its mind. Pope Gregory VIII launches a fresh crusade faster. Then you can say papal bull. And suddenly you're seeing royal crests on every tent flap. 3 monarchs take the cross: Frederick Barbarossa of the Holy Roman Empire, Philip II of France, and good old Richard I of England. It's a rock star lineup. If rock stars wore armor, insulted each other in Latin, and frequently got lost on the way to battles. Frederick takes the land route and promptly drowns in a river in Asia Minor. Just slips, sinks in his armor, and that's that. Some say it's poetic justice. Others say it's a logistical disaster of epic proportions. Either way, his army panics and scatters like sheep in a thunderstorm. You cross his name off your mental list. Philip and Richard head by sea, though not together, because they already hate each other. You hear tales of their bickering even before they dock. Richard makes a pit stop in Sicily, then detours to Cyprus, where he storms ashore, defeats the island's ruler, and casually claims the entire island for himself. You've got to hand it to him. Richard is nothing if not theatrical. Eventually, he reaches the Holy Land and sets his sights on Acre, a vital coastal city under siege by Crusader forces for almost 2 years. You join up. You've seen Acre. Before it's a fortress with walls like jaws and a port that smells like fish, blood, and desperation. Richard arrives in mid-1191 and immediately gets to work, launching bombardments, building siege towers, and shouting orders in perfect French. Within weeks, the city falls. Cheers erupt, flags rise, and Saladin retreats. It's a solid win, but then things get complicated. The Muslim garrison inside Acre had surrendered under terms that included the release of thousands of Christian prisoners in exchange for safe passage. Saladin stalls. Negotiations drag on. And Richard, never the patient sort, decides he's done waiting. You remember that day with perfect clarity. August 20th, 1191. The heat is stifling. Dust clings to your sweat. You're ordered to stand watch as over 2,000 Muslim prisoners, including women and children, are marched out of the city. Then comes the command: execute them. You hesitate. Everyone does. This isn't battle. This is cold, systematic. But the order stands, and soon the ground runs dark and sticky again. Some say Richard had no choice. Others call it a war crime. Historians still argue about whether it was strategy or sheer spite. You just try not to remember the faces. The campaign moves south along the coast. Richard and Saladin continue their chess match, each probing for advantage, neither gaining much ground. The Battle of Arsef is a rare moment of clarity. You're there just barely hanging onto your horses. Richard rallies the cavalry and smashes Saladin's forces in a brilliant open-field maneuver. It's a win, a big one, but it doesn't break Saladin. He retreats, regroups, and returns again and again like the tide. And Jerusalem, still out of reach. You march inland once or twice, get within shouting distance of the holy city. But Richard hesitates. He knows he can't hold it if he takes it. Supply lines are too thin. The Crusader states are too weak. Besides, winter is coming, and morale is sinking faster than your boots in the mud. Back at camp, Richard tries diplomacy. Saladin, ever the gentleman, sends fruit baskets and fine horses. They exchange letters, witty, formal, oddly respectful. At one point, Richard even suggests marrying his sister off to Saladin's brother to unite the kingdoms. It's not a bad idea, honestly, but no one can agree on who'd actually rule. Eventually, in 1192, they settle for a truce. Richard secures safe passage for Christian pilgrims to Jerusalem, even though the city remains in Muslim hands. The crusade is officially a draw. You watch as Richard boards a ship to sail home. He's got dysentery, a bruised ego, and enemies waiting back in Europe. You'll later hear that he gets shipwrecked, imprisoned by the Holy Roman Emperor, and ransomed for a king's fortune. You'll also hear he never once sets foot in England during his reign. Wildaunt, and what about you? You stay. Someone has to. The Crusader states are still hanging on. You patch your boots, oil your sword, and pray that next year's crops won't fail. The war isn't over. It never really ends. It just pauses now and then, like a bad song you can't stop humming. Still, there's something comforting about Richard's brief, brutal visit. For a moment, you felt like maybe, just maybe, the tide was turning. Even if it wasn single quotes to you dream of Jerusalem, of its stone streets and golden light. And though your side didn't retake it, you feel a strange peace knowing the fighting paused before it consumed everyone. But then again, peace never lasts long out here. The sea wind tugs at your cloak as you stand on the walls of Acre, watching ships roll in, some bearing pilgrims, others carrying spices, wine, or letters from kings you'll never meet. Richard's gone, the banners are a little more tattered, and nobody's really sure what happens next. You're in that strange post-Crusade limbo. The truce of 1192 has held for now. Pilgrims can travel safely to Jerusalem, and the borders are quiet. But they're too quiet, like the kind of silence you get before a dog bites. You sharpen your sword anyway, just in case. The Crusader states have shrunk. Jerusalem is still under Muslim control, though the Christians hold a decent slice of the coast. Acre, Jaffa, and a few fortresses tucked into the hills like forgotten toys. You've set up a modest life here, a little home near the edge of a walled village. It leaks. The olives are sour, but it's yours. And then comes the letter. Another crusade. You groan audibly. This one's different, they say. No kings, this time. Just nobles and Venetian businessmen with suspiciously enthusiastic shipping contracts. Welcome to the Fourth Crusade. You're not in Europe anymore. But you hear the rumors. Instead of heading to the Holy Land, the Crusaders run out of money in Venice and make a shady deal with the Doge. They end up detouring to Zara, a Christian city, which they promptly sack. That's already bad. But then things get really weird. In 1204, they set their sights on Constantinople. Yes, that Constantinople. Greatest Christian city in the East, seat of the Byzantine Empire, and supposedly your ally. So naturally they attack it. The siege is brutal. You hear stories of relics stolen, churches looted, nuns assaulted, icons melted down for coin. One guy claims to have seen a drunken French knight riding a stolen donkey through the Hagia Sophia. Historians still argue whether the Crusaders were manipulated, opportunistic, or just completely lost the plot. Probably all three. When word reaches your part of the Levant, you don't know how to respond. Laugh, cry, throw your last sandal. At a pigeon, the Orthodox Christians are furious. The Muslims are amused. And you're just deeply, deeply tired. The Fourth Crusade never reaches the Holy Land, not even close. It ends in flames, betrayal, and a Latin Empire that collapses within decades. Great job, everyone. Meanwhile, back in the Crusader states, things are unraveling again. The truce with Saladin's successors, fragile at best, is breaking down. His death in 1193 left a power vacuum, and like any good medieval soap opera, that means civil war. You try to keep track. Saladin's sons, nephews, rival generals, all of them, jostling for power. Some even ask the Crusaders for help. You don't know who to trust, so you stay out of it. And pray the next sultan doesn't decide your fig tree looks strategically valuable then. Just when you think it can't get weirder, along comes the Children's Crusade. Yes, you heard that right. In 1212, a French boy named Stephen and a German boy named Nicholas both claim they've been divinely instructed to lead children, thousands of them, to peacefully reclaim Jerusalem. No swords, just faith, and bare feet. You blink, surely. This is a joke, it's not. Or at least, it wasn't for the children. Most never even make it out of Europe. They die of hunger, exhaustion, or simply vanish. Some are sold into slavery. Others disappear into ports and cities, lost forever. Historians still argue whether the Children's Crusade was ever a real mass movement, or just a handful of tragic pilgrimages, conflated by chroniclers. Either way, you tuck that story deep in your mind, as yet another reminder that good intentions don't make good tactics. The Fifth Crusade follows in the 1210s. You see new ships off the coast. Again, shiny armor, polished boots, a level of optimism that makes your teeth hurt. This one's supposed to go after Egypt first, which, strategically, makes sense. Control the Nile, and you squeeze the Muslim world's breadbasket. They land at Damietta, a Nile port city, and actually capture it in 1219. Things are going well, until they march inland toward Cairo. You almost admire their confidence. Then the Nile floods, their path is cut off, and they're forced to surrender. You sigh, again, the Muslim commander. Al-Kamel Saladin's nephew is generous. He even offers to return Jerusalem in exchange for peace. The Crusaders say no. You stare into the middle distance for a full hour. What happens next? A pause, another regroup. Then Pope Gregory IX calls for yet another attempt, and the Sixth Crusade arrives with the strangest twist of all. No fighting, this one's led by Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor and professional headache for the papacy. He's smart, sarcastic, and deeply unbothered by papal disapproval. He shows up in the Holy Land around 1228 and negotiates Jeb. No siege towers, no fire, just words, and it works. In 1229, Frederick signs a treaty with Al-Kamil, regaining Jerusalem, Bethlehem, and Nazareth all, without lifting a sword. You're stunned. The city is handed back peacefully, with Muslims allowed to remain in worship. It's a diplomatic marvel. A crusade by clipboard. But of course, it can't last. The treaty expires. Muslim forces retake Jerusalem in 1244, after a brutal battle. You're not surprised anymore. You don't even flinch when they say the Holy Sepulchre was damaged. You've built up emotional calluses. The Crusader dream is fading. You feel it. You taste it in your thin soup. Acre is still yours for now, but you don't fool yourself into thinking it'll last forever. You look around and see newcomers. Still arriving wide-eyed pilgrims. Fresh-faced knights. Merchants chasing relics and silk. They think they're part of something holy. You don't tell them what you know. Let them have their moment. You had yours, and the storm's circling. Again. The heat's thicker now, clinging to your armor and stifling your lungs like a damp wool cloak. Acre still stands just. Barely, but you can feel the world outside tightening its grip. The Crusader states are like candles, burning down to the wick, and you're holding your breath, waiting for the final flicker. You've lived through more Crusades than you can count. Some came with kings and trumpets. Others stumbled in like confused tourists. And each time, the pattern's the same. Excitement, betrayal, failure, and retreat. Now, in the mid-13th century, the pattern begins again, this time, under the banner of Louis IX of France. They call him St. Louis. He's pious, earnest, and apparently so devoted that he wears a hair shirt under his royal robes. You hear he even fasts on Fridays until he faints. Sounds exhausting. The Seventh Crusade kicks off in 1248, with Louis leading a formidable army. But instead of charging toward Jerusalem, he heads for Egypt again. Because that worked so well last time, you're not with them this time. You're older now. Your joints ache when the wind shifts. Instead, you listen to the stories trickling back from the Nile. The Crusaders captured Damietta again. Then march into the interior and get promptly bogged down by disease, poor planning, and an unfortunate habit of underestimating the Egyptian army. The climax. The Battle of Al-Manshura, where Louis' forces are ambushed in the streets and decimated. Louis himself is captured, yes, captured by Egyptian forces and held for ransom. You imagine the awkwardness. A saintly king sitting cross-legged in a prison tent, probably still fasting. They eventually pay his ransom, and Louis is released. But rather than scurrying home with his tail between his legs, he doubles down. He stays in the Holy Land for 4 more years, pouring money into castle construction, fortifying ports, and shoring up defenses. In a way, he's one of the few Crusaders who actually does something useful. You visit a few of the castles. He reinforces Beaufort, Jaffa, Caesarea. The walls are thick. The towers are high. But you know it won't be enough. Outside the borders of your shrinking kingdom, a new threat is rising. Bigger, faster, hungrier than anything the Levant has seen before. No, not Saladin's descendants. Not even the Egyptian Mamluks. This one comes from the east, from the steppes of Central Asia. The Mongols, you first hear the name. Like a rumor, a tribe from beyond the horizon. Then, more urgently, they sacked Baghdad. Then, finally, they're coming. In 1258, the Mongols destroy Baghdad, seat of the Abbasid Caliphate, the very heart of Islamic scholarship and power. The city is burned, libraries are drowned, scholars executed, even the Tigris runs black with ink and red with blood. You blink at the news. It's like learning the moon fell into the sea. Historians still argue how many died, hundreds of thousands, a million. No one's sure, but the effect is immediate. The Muslim world reels. The Mongols are unstoppable, and suddenly everyone Muslim. And Christian Alec is scrambling to make alliances. You meet Mongol envoys once. Strange clothes, sharper eyes, polite and terrifying. They hand out scrolls like candy and speak in measured tones. Some in your camp dream of an alliance, the enemy of my enemy, and all that. But the Mongols don't think in terms of crusades, they think in terms of conquest. In the background, the Mamluks rise to power in Egypt. Former slave soldiers turned rulers. They're disciplined, ruthless, and terrifyingly efficient. In 1260, they meet the Mongols at the Battle of Angelut, in modern-day Israeland, win. It's the first real defeat for the Mongols. Suddenly, the world shifts again. You breathe a little easier, but not for long. The Mamluks are here to stay, and they've got their eyes on the remaining Crusader enclaves. Jerusalem is long gone. Antioch falls in 1268, after a brutal siege. You hear that Bohemond Vi, Prince of Antioch, was caught off guard, possibly literally asleep at the wheel. The city is ransacked, its people massacred. You don't even flinch. Any more when you hear that part? It's practically routine. Meanwhile, Louis IX, yes, his back launches the Eighth Crusade in 1270. But instead of heading to the Holy Land, he targets Tunis in North Africa. Why? No one really knows. Some say it was political. Some say strategic. Others think Louis just wanted to convert the Tunisian Sultan. What actually happens? Dysentery. Louis dies of it within a month. The crusade dissolves on the spot. The ships sail home. Another campaign ends, not in glory, but in gastrointestinal defeat. You stand on the beach at Acre, watching the waves roll in, and wonder how many more times they'll try. How many more crusades? How many more boys with swords and crosses carved into their armor, hoping to be remembered? You still sharpen your blade every morning. Old habits. But your heart isn't in it anymore. Acre is the last major stronghold. The Mamluks are advancing. The Pope is distracted. Europe is tired, and deep down you feel it in your bones. The end is closer than anyone wants to admit. You wake to the sound of hammering, someone reinforcing the gate again. Not that it'll help. You're in Acre, last jewel of the Latin East, and the cracks are starting to show. Literally, the stones creak under salt and time. You've patched the walls so many times you can't tell old from new anymore. It's the 1290s now, and the atmosphere is thick with dread. You see it in the eyes of the merchants, the quick prayers of the guards, the silence after sunset. Everyone knows what's coming. The Mamluks have been inching closer for years. City by city, they've chipped away at the Crusader coastline like waves wearing down a cliff. Tripoli fell in 1289, after a long siege. You remember watching the smoke from afar, columns rising like funeral pyres. The survivors trickled into Acre, telling stories of mangled gates, broken churches, and Mamluk cavalry who seemed to ride on the wind. Still, your leaders argue. No surprise there. The local barons can't agree on who should command the defense, and the Venetians and Genoese would rather fight each other than the enemy at the gates. You once saw a duel break out over a disputed spice shipment. The spice. One dot, and then it happens. Spring 1291. The Mamluk Sultan, Al-Ashraf Khalil, marches north with an army so large it seems to ripple across the horizon. Tens of thousands strong cavalry, archers, siege engineers, all seasoned in the brutal warfare of Egypt and Syria. You stand on the walls and squint. At first, they look like ants. Then, as they get closer, more like fate. The siege of Acre begins. The first night the walls shake with catapult stones. The noise is constant, like thunder caught in a bottle. You barely sleep. Arrows fly in both directions. Oil boils in the cauldrons. And you, veteran of 10 crusades, keeper of a very average sword jest, do your job. Again, you patch walls. You carry water. You comfort terrified boys who've never held a blade until this week. Acre's defenders are a mixed bag. French knights, In gleaming mail, local Levantins, Italian sailors, and monks with crossbows. The Hospitallers and Templars are there too, holed up in their strongholds, swearing oaths and sharpening steel. You fight off the first wave, and the second, but they just keep coming. Each day, more of the city crumbles. Towers collapse. Streets become traps. The Mamluks build siege towers so tall, they seem to scrape the sun. They breach the outer walls after a week. You fall back. They breach the inner wall. You fall back again, by the third week. Acre is chaos. You're posted near the Church of St. Andrew when the main gate finally gives way. You hear it first a low, cracking groaning. Then the roar of thousands pouring in. The streets flood with enemy troops. You hack. You run. You trip over bodies. Smoke blinds you. There's no more formation, no more orders, just scattered resistance and raw survival. The Hospitallers make a final stand near the docks. You join them briefly, holding a narrow alley against a tide of flashing sabers and arrows that seem to hum through the air. A Templar beside you loses a leg and keeps fighting. You don't know his name, but you won't forget his scream. By some miracle or maybe dumb luck you reach the harbor. The ships are leaving fast, overloaded with screaming children, desperate mothers, wounded knights. You're pushed aboard by a soldier who says something in Italian and slaps your horse goodbye. From the deck, you watch Acre burn. The towers fall, one by one. The churches collapse. The last defenders are slaughtered or drowned trying to swim. The Templar fortress, once the pride of the order, explodes in a final act of defiance when the last holdouts detonate their powder stores. It's over. The Crusader dreamed the whole chaotic, bloody, strange experiment that started 2 centuries. Agui's dead. You sail away in silence, wrapped in a torn cloak that still smells of ash. Behind you, the Holy Land slips below the horizon, and you wonder if it ever was holy. Or if that was just a word people used to excuse the things they did. Historians still argue what the Crusades actually accomplished. Some say they united Europe. Others say they weakened Byzantium and devastated the East. Some argue they helped fuel the Renaissance through cross-cultural contact. Others claim they were just a 2-century-long fever dream of steel and sermons. You don't argue. You've seen too much. The ship takes you to Cyprus, now a kind of sad Crusader retirement. Home-Lusignan kings still rule there, pretending the game isn't over. You take a small room in Limassol, near the water. You fish. You pray. You try not to dream of Acre, and yet sometimes, in the quiet, you remember. The glow of torches in a desert night. The clash of hooves on stone. The first time you saw Jerusalem rise above the hills. The weight of a relic in your hands. The smell of almond bread before a siege. And you wonder, was it all for nothing? Maybe, but you were there. You lived it, and that, for better or worse, is history. The sea doesn't change, no matter how many kingdoms crumble behind it. You sit on a low wall in Limassol, Cyprus, watching waves roll in the same way they always have, quiet, lazy, indifferent. You've been here a while now. The mainland is lost, and the Crusader kingdom has shrunk to this sleepy island that clings to old glories, like barnacles to a shipwreck. You're not alone, of course. Acre's survivors trickled in over months, some missing limbs, others missing hope. Few brought relics hidden in sacks, pieces of saints' bones wrapped in rags, and candle stubs from altars now reduced to ash. One man claims he smuggled out a chalice from the Holy Sepulchre. You don't believe him, but you let him talk. Sometimes lies are more comforting than silence. Cyprus becomes a sort of museum of the Crusades, everyone pretending the shows still on, even though the curtain fell years ago. The Lusignan dynasty, French kings ruling over a Greek-speaking island, still call themselves kings of Jerusalem, even though they haven't seen the city in decades. You once attended one of their court feasts. The wine was good, the food overcooked, and the conversation awkward. The politics here are petty. Nobles duel over dock fees. Genoese and Venetians bicker about trading rights. The Templars and Hospitallers shuffle around like exiled monks, plotting their next move in libraries full of damp scrolls. You nod politely when they ask you for stories from Acre. You leave out the bad parts. There isn't enough wine for those. There are whispers, always whispers about a new crusade. A 9th, a 10th, maybe even an 11th. Someone always thinks it's time to try again. Europe's kings still like the idea of retaking Jerusalem, as long as someone else does the fighting. The Pope sends letters. Bishops hold meetings. Preachers dust off their old sermons. And now, there's a new contender on the map. The Ottomans. You first hear about them from a passing merchant, just a small Anatolian beylik, aggressive but manageable. By the next decade, they're swallowing cities like a hungry beast. You see the fear in your neighbors' faces. These aren't the patchwork armies of the old Crusades. The Ottomans are disciplined, strategic, patient. They take Bursa, then Gallipoli, then Adrianople. You start to realize the ground is shifting again. Not just politically, but spiritually. The world feels less medieval. Fewer processions, fewer relics, more coins, more contracts. Even the pilgrim caravans that used to cross Cyprus on their way to Jerusalem have vanished. Now it's mostly traders, mercenaries, and bored sons of nobles looking for cheap land or cheaper wine. The Templars, once the fiercest warriors of Christendom, are gone now too. You remember the year 1312. The Pope dissolved the order after years of rumors, arrests, and political pressure from the French crown. Heresy charges, confessions under torture, secret rituals, none of it felt quite real. One day they were your comrades in arms, and the next, traitors to be burned at the stake. You went to one of the executions. You wish you hadn't. The on the other hand, are still kicking. They pack up and move to Rhodes, turning it into a new base of operations. Some talk about launching sea raids, others build hospitals. The rest drink heavily. You nod when they talk of glory and retaking the Holy Land, but deep down, you know they won't get far. Your joints ache in the mornings now. You've stopped wearing armor unless someone's getting married or buried. You pass your sword to a boy who doesn't know how to hold it right. He asks if it's true you fought under Richard the Lionheart. You lie and say yes, it's easier that way. One day, a ship arrives in port. On it is a man with stories of Constantinople, the great city still standing, still proud, still resenting the West for what happened in 1204. He says the Ottomans are encircling it, preparing something big. You recognize the signs, and part of you wonders, is this the end of the Byzantine world too? There's no more talk of new crusades after that. Just murmurs about trading routes, spice monopolies, and a new type of ship that can sail west for months without needing a port. The world is moving on. The age of knights and relics and torchlit processions is fading like a bad dream at dawn. You watch a group of children playing with sticks in the sand, pretending to storm Jerusalem. Argue over who gets to be Saladin. No one wants to be the king of Jerusalem anymore. And in that moment, you understand. The Crusades didn't just end. They evaporated. All the battles, the banners, the blood-soaked sermons, they were part of an age that doesn't quite fit anymore. Like a suit of mail in a room full of paper and ink. Like you, sitting in the sun, telling stories to people who have already stopped listening. But the sea still rolls in, and the olives still rinkin, the bells still ring for vespers. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, you swear you can still hear the clatter of hooves on stone, and the chant of pilgrims heading east. But it's only the wind. The sun's hanging low over Cyprus, and your bones know the hour better than any clock. You're slower now, quieter. Most days, you sit on a worn bench outside the chapel, watching pilgrims pass, though even they are fewer now. No one walks with crosses sewn into their cloaks anymore. The days of holy wars feel like stories told by someone else. But sometimes, the past comes knocking. A young merchant from Venice corners you in the port. He's heard you were an acre, wants to know if the stories are true about secret Templar vaults, cursed relics, lost maps. You laugh, loudly. Not because it's funny, but because it's always the same. They're still chasing ghosts. You tell him about the siege, instead, about the heat, the dust, the panic. He doesn't seem to hear any of that, just keeps asking. If there's treasure buried beneath the old churches, you point him toward the hills and let him waste a few days chasing nothing. But something's shifted in you that night. You sit with your old gear, rusted mail, a dented helmet, a faded banner that once hung from your spear. You touch the fabric, and it feels like a skin you used to wear, one that doesn't fit anymore. Word arrives soon after. Constantinople has fallen. It's 1453. The city that was once the greatest fortress of Christianity in the East, the bulwark of the Roman Empire for 1,000 years, is now under the banner of the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. You close your eyes and try to picture it Hegia, Sophia echoing not with Latin hymns, but the call to prayer. You think of that merchant from weeks ago. Wonder if he's already drafting a new map, already imagining the next crusade. But there's no crusade this time, no rescue, no armies. Europe has changed. Now they talk about printing presses and banks, trade routes to India, and new worlds. Across the sea, even the Pope sends more diplomats than soldiers. The age of knights is over, quietly swallowed by the age of merchants and maps. You stroll through Limassol one morning and pass a group of schoolchildren reading from a book-hand-illustrated chronicle, full of banners and battles. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a picture. Not you specifically, of course, but someone like you. A knight with a red cross on his chest, sword raised dramatically, staring knobbily into a golden sky. You snort. You remember what that sky actually looked like: cloudy, most days, full of smoke and sand, and that sword. It wasn't raised like that. You spent more time dragging it through mud. Historians still argue what the Crusades were really about: faith, power, greed, survival. Maybe all of it, maybe none of it. You stop trying to make sense of it. It's like trying to weigh smoke. But you do remember moments, like that time near Antioch, when your friend tricked a noble into thinking boiled turnips were relics of St. Paul. Or the night in Acre, when you danced barefoot with a Templar hood, never danced before. Or the day you saw Jerusalem for the first time, glowing under a dust-colored sky, and thought just for a second that maybe it had all been worth it. You don't believe in that anymore. But you remember believing in it. And that, strangely, brings you peace. Later that week, a monk visits from Rhodes. He brings news from the Hospitallers, still fighting pirates and patching wounds on distant islands. He asks if you'd like to join them. A last hurrah. One more banner. One more cause. You smile, shake your head. You've had enough causes. The monk nods and leaves behind a small wooden cross. You hang it by your doorknob, because it means what it once did, but because it reminds you of who you were. A boy in a dusty village, a man in a steel shell, a ghost in a changing world. And that's okay. At night, you dream less of battle now, and more of olive trees, of quiet fields, of laughter in languages you never learned to speak. You sleep better than you have in years, because you know what others don't. That wars end, glory fades. And even the bloodiest stories are, in the end, just stories. You lived one, now it lives in you. You wake before dawn, as always. Old habits die harder than empires. The rooster crows, somewhere off in the hills, and the island smells of salt and wild thyme. You stretch slowly, careful not to startle your back, and pull your robe around your shoulders. The armor's long gone, given to a blacksmith's boy who melted it down into horseshoes and door hinges. You sip weak wine on the porch and watch the sea. Cyprus has become your sanctuary, your exile, maybe both. Most of the men you knew are long gone. The ones who marched with you across the Levant, who bled beside you at Arsef, who whispered psalms through cracked lips at Jerusalem's gates there. All stories now. A few are buried beneath quiet stones. Others lie somewhere in sand or surf, unmarked and forgotten. You carry their names anyway. Sometimes a traveler from the west stops by. They always ask the same questions. Did you really see the holy city? Were the Saracens as fierce as they say? Did you fight under Richard? You give them what they want. A sword raised, a banner fluttering, a righteous charge into enemy lines. You leave out the rain, the rot, the way a man sounds when his lung collapses under chainmail. You've learned to shape your memories like a smith shapes metal into tools, not truths. Your house is small. Just 2 rooms, a vine-covered wall, and a little garden where the tomatoes do better than they should. You spend your afternoons tending to them, talking aloud to the birds, or to no one at all. There's comfort in the rhythm water, weed, repeat. And while you no longer believe in crusades, you do believe in good soup. You still keep a relic hidden. In a box under the floorboards, a shard of bone supposedly from St. John. You're not sure it's real, but it got you past 3 Mamluk checkpoints once, so it earns its keep. The world changes around you. Ships arrive, bearing news of Portuguese. Explorers pushing along the coast of Africa, searching for sea routes to India. You hear whispers of guns replacing bows, of universities where theology shares space with astronomy, of books printed in great numbers, spreading faster than sermons. Even the church is splintering. There's talk of reform, of dissent, of men nailing angry letters to cathedral doors. You don't understand all of it, but you feel it in your bones. The age you knew has ended. Sometimes you walk to the cliffs and look eastward, toward a land you haven't seen in years. The hills of Galilee, the walls of Acre, the long-lost spires of Jerusalem. They live in you now, like dreams clear one moment, fuzzy the next. Always just out of reach. The last time you cried was for Antioch. You read about it in a letter, a scribbled note from a monk who'd heard from a sailor who'd passed near. The ruins, gone, razed. The churches flattened. The libraries burned. The bells melted into cannonballs. You wept like a child, not because you believed the city could be saved, but because you once believed in saving it. And that belief, that was the last real thing you had. One day, a storm rolls in from the west, hard and sudden. The trees bend. Tiles rattle loose from rooftops. You sit at your window and listen to the thunder. For a moment, it sounds like war drums again, and your hand twitches toward the hilt of a sword you no longer own. But the moment passes. You light a candle and recite a psalm in Latin, the old words stumbling off your tongue like forgotten friends. You do not pray for victory anymore. You pray for rest, and slowly, you begin to understand that survival itself is a kind of victory. Not grand, not sung about, but real. You remember a fellow knight once said that God tests his favorites most fiercely. You laughed at the time. You laugh again now. Perhaps it wasn't a test. Perhaps you were simply in the wrong century with the wrong dreams. But even wrong dreams leave behind a trace. There's a boy in your village who carves tiny figures, knights, kings, beasts, and towers. He asked you once what it was like to wear armor. You told him it was hot, heavy, and often smelled like old cheese. He laughed. Said that didn't sound heroic. You told him that was the point. Still, he carved a tiny version of you and left it by your doorstep. You keep it on your windowsill helmet, sword, and all watching the sea with you. Maybe that's how legends survive, in bits and pieces, a tale half remembered, a wooden figure on a ledge, a scar that aches when the wind shifts. You don't need statues or songs. You just need the quiet. The mornings are gentler now, and you take them slow. The birds start before the sun even rises, little chatterers announcing another day of nothing much. You step into your sandals, stretch what's left of your spine, and greet the sunrise, like an old drinking buddy. You survived the Crusades. You figure you can survive breakfast. There's a boy who brings you bread most mornings. His name is Leo. He's Greek. Or maybe Cypriotids, all blurred out. Harand, he asks too many questions. Did you ever hold Jerusalem? You nod. Did you ever see a Saracen prince? You shrugged. Did you ever kill a man? You say nothing. He takes that as a yes. You don't mind Leo. He's curious the way you once were. Back when you thought swords were the answer to everything. He likes stories, and sometimes you give him one. Tales of Saladin's chivalry, of Richard's thunderous charge, of cities made of gold and towers that touched the clouds. You leave out the dysentery. He asked you once why you didn't write your stories down. Why? Your hands only planted seeds now, instead of drawing maps or forging swords. You told him that written stories are for those who want to remember. Yours, you said, are for those who want to forget. Still, he scribbles in a notebook after every visit. Maybe one day your grumbling will turn into a chapter in a dusty book. Maybe someone will read it centuries from now and wonder if it's true. Let them wonder. The sea still calls to you now and then. Sometimes you think of sailing east, again to sea. But there's nowhere to return to. The Levant you knew is gone. Cities renamed, castles crumbled, roads overgrown. It's not your world anymore. You get letters, now and then, from old comrades scattered across the Mediterranean. One became a monk. Another married into a merchant family in Venice. One died in a duel over a spilled cup of wine. You think he'd have liked that ending? They all ask the same thing in their letters. Do you still dream of the Holy Land? You do. Not every night, but often enough. Only now, it's never the battles or the banners that return. It's the smaller things. The feel of warm stone under your feet at dawn in Jerusalem. The cool of a cistern at Caesarea. The smell of roasted onions and cumin in the back alleys of Tyre. A girl's laugh in a market. A hymn echoing from a chapel. At dusk, you wonder if that's what God meant all along, not the sword. But the silence between the strikes. Historians still argue what the Crusades really achieved. Did they halt the spread of Islam? Did they unify Europe? Did they accelerate trade and discovery? Or were they just one long, holy tantrum? You think maybe they were all of those things, and none. A mess of motives, dressed in banners and soaked in incense. One part faith, one part politics, one part sheer accident. But you also know this. For all the sermons and steel, the Crusades never managed to hold the Holy Land. Not really, not permanently, not without breaking it in the process. Maybe holiness was never something to hold. You told that to Leo once, when he asked why the Crusaders lost. He frowned and asked, so it was all pointless. You shook your head. No, just not what we thought it was. And that was the truth, or close enough. These days, you spend your afternoons beneath a fig tree, whittling bits of driftwood into rough shapes. Ships, lions. One that sort of resembles Pope Urban II, though only if you squint. Leo thinks they're fascinating. You let him take some home. Maybe one day one of those will end up in a drawer somewhere, misidentified as a saint or a king. The church bell rings for evening prayers. You don't go anymore, but you bow your head as the sound echoes across the water. There's still faith in you, just quieter now, less urgent, more honest. You light a small oil lamp at dusk, place it in the window. Not for travelers there. Aren't many these days, but for memory. For those who didn't make it back. For those who still haunt the shores of your mind. The wind rises off the sea, warm and steady. You sit in your chair, blanket over your knees, and listen. Not to sermons, not to banners flapping, just to the breeze. And it whispers, not of conquest, but of peace. You sleep lighter than you used to, but that's age. A breeze rustles the olive trees outside your window, and your dreams drift quietly now. More screams, no more galloping hooves, just fading shapes and faces lit by torchlight. It's morning. Again, and the light crawls in through the shutter slats, like a familiar friend. You rise, joints cracking like old hinges, and make your way to the garden. The figs are nearly ripe. You pinch one gently, test its weight, and nod with quiet satisfaction. Not bad for a retired warrior of Christendom. A traveler arrives at your gate not long after breakfast. Young, sunburnt, with ink-stained fingers and the clumsy politeness of a man raised among books. He introduces himself as Tomas, says he's from Aragon. He's writing a history of the Crusades. You sigh, but wave him in. He's respectful, which helps. He doesn't ask if you killed anyone, or if you found the Holy Grail. Instead, he listens, takes notes, asks about the weather in Acre, the look of the stars over Jerusalem, the way it felt when the ships finally left the harbor without you. You tell him the truth, or something close, that the Crusades were many things. holy and unholy, glorious and grotesque. That some came for salvation, some for silver, and most without a clue what they'd find. That some fell in love in those strange, dusty lands, and others left pieces of themselves behind in ways no relic could ever capture. Tomas scribbles fast, nodding with that wide-eyed hunger you remember from your own youth. You're careful what you give him, not because you have secrets, but because you know he'll polish it all into something shiny. That's what histories do. They smooth the edges. Before he leaves, he asks you one last question. Would you do it all again? You pause, think. Of the boy you were, clutching a wooden cross and dreaming of Jerusalem. Think of the old roads winding through unfamiliar deserts. Think of the prayers, the fire, the silence, afterward. No, you say quietly, but I'm glad I did. He doesn't understand, not fully. He thanks you anyway, leaves a small pouch of dates, and disappears down the road like so many others before him. That night, you sit outside with your little oil lamp flickering beside you, just like always. The sky is full of stars, some new. Some you've named yourself over the years. You wrap your cloak tight and close your eyes. The world you knew is gone, but the sea still breathes. The wind still sighs. And somewhere far away, a bell tolls the hour. Steady as a heartbeat. You think of the hills around Jerusalem, where the stone paths wound like veins through the dust. You think of the first time you set foot in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and how the air there felt so still it made your skin hum. You think of friends' lost victories that meant less than you'd hoped, and the odd peace that comes from being very, very tired. You've done your part. You've survived what few could. You've buried more than swords in the dirt. You watch the candle burn lower, and as the sky deepens, as the crickets rise in quiet chorus, you let go. So now, let the centuries fall away. The clatter of hooves, the roar of siege engines, the echo of hymns in stone churches, all of it softens, fades, and dissolves into a long, gentle hush. The roads are empty now, the banners rolled up, the swords sheathed. Even the old cathedrals sleep in silence, worn smooth by time and rain. No more trumpets, no more vows. Just the stillness of dust settling over forgotten cities. Let your breath slow with the tide. Let your thoughts drift down quiet alleys of memory, where nothing chases and nothing needs to be remembered. The Crusaders are gone, the kingdoms too. All that remains is the wind in the cypress trees and the lull of a sea that never keeps score. You lie back, the earth warm beneath you, stars gentle above. You are no longer soldier, pilgrim, or penitent. You are simply here, a small, steady heartbeat in a world that keeps turning. The wars have ended, the maps have changed, but your story, your quiet, human story remains, tucked safely into the folds of history. So close your eyes now. There are no gates to guard, no battles to fight, no relics to protect, just soft shadows and the hush of sleep drawing near. The journey has ended, the tale is told, and the night is yours. Sleep well. Crusader, sleep well.